Have you ever wondered how one impulsive decision could completely destroy someone's life? At exactly 6:47 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning, an HOA Karen made a $2.3 million mistake that would land her in federal prison for 8 years. And it all began with a pair of bolt cutters placed in the wrong military vehicle. Clang! The sharp bite of metal jaws crushing through my security chain shattered the calm suburban silence like gunfire. That single snap was the moment Bethany Kensington Wright transformed from HOA president into a federal felon in under 30 seconds. While I was deployed overseas battling drug cartels, this power-drunk suburban tyrant decided my eyesore vehicle had to go. What she didn't realize was that the Jeep she tampered with belonged to a federal drug task force packed with $347,000 worth of classified surveillance equipment. And I just happen to be the kind of federal agent who specializes in dismantling criminal empires. She thought she was hauling off a soldier's old truck. Instead, she walked headfirst into crimes that would make cartel bosses jealous. Now let me ask you this. What would you do if an HOA dictator destroyed your property while you were serving overseas? Drop a flag emoji and tell me where you're tuning in from. I'm Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and just 3 months ago, I believed inheriting my grandmother's home would be a blessing. Turns out I couldn't have been more wrong. Willowbrook Estates, the picture-perfect suburban nightmare where every house wears the same beige paint, sprinklers hiss on timer, and fresh mulch only masks the smell of arrogance. HOA dues, $150 a month to maintain community standards. Translation: paying a power-hungry Karen to make your life miserable. I'm an Army Reserve MP, newly assigned to a federal drug task force, and this is where my nightmare began. Rose's house was supposed to be my safety net. I planned to rent it out while on deployment, build equity, and honor the woman who raised me after my parents were killed in a car crash when I was 12. The place still carries the smell of her homemade tortillas and belay. Every creaky floorboard echoes with lessons she taught me about right and wrong. "Mijo," she used to say, "you stand up to bullies, but you do it the right way." Then came Bethany Kensington Wright. Imagine a 52-year-old real estate agent with a white Lexus SUV and a habit of measuring grass with an actual ruler. 7 years as HOA president have molded her into a full-blown suburban tyrant. Her husband, Carl, holds a seat on the city council, which only feeds her sense of invincibility. This is the same woman who sends violation notices if Christmas lights linger past January. 2 weeks into my deployment, her email hits my inbox. Violation notice. Unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. My government-issued Jeep Wrangler, clearly marked with federal law enforcement decals, was suddenly labeled an eyesore. Bethany twisted HOA covenants to claim work vehicles were banned from residential driveways. What she didn't realize was that this Jeep carried $200,000 worth of surveillance gear for active cartel operations. GPS trackers, encrypted radios, covert cameras, all federal property that could only be moved with official authorization. The fine? $50 per day. And it stacked up while I was out there dodging bullets overseas. My sister Maya, sweet, patient Maya, the middle school teacher, tried reasoning with the suburban tyrant herself. She drove over, explained I was deployed, even showed copies of my orders, and offered to cover the Jeep with a tarp. "Rules are rules," Bethany snapped, glaring at Maya like she was something stuck to her shoe. "If your brother can't follow community standards, maybe this neighborhood isn't right for your family." I still hear Maya's voice cracking during that phone call, sitting in Grandma's kitchen, trying not to break down. "Tank," she threatened to put a lien on the house. She said Carl knows people in the school district, that if I supported you, it could cost me my job. That was the moment Maya uncovered the pattern. The Johnsons, he's a Marine, cited for a too loud motorcycle. Sarah Martinez, Navy wife, fined for unprofessional garden gnomes while her husband was deployed. One by one, military families in Willowbrook were being targeted. And here's the worst part. Bethany's violations were fake. Maya dug through Grandma's old HOA bylaws from 1987 and found the truth. Government vehicles were explicitly exempt. Military, law enforcement, emergency services, all protected. Bethany wasn't enforcing the rules, she was making them up, counting on fear and ignorance to keep neighbors quiet. And it worked. People whispered over fences, but no one dared speak out. Her husband's political connections made resistance feel pointless. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about parking or property values. It was organized harassment, backed by a corrupt HOA board with political cover. I remember the grit of sand between my teeth as Maya spoke, the mix of diesel fumes and sweat in the desert heat, and my grandmother's voice echoing in my head. Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way. While I was deployed overseas, fighting to keep drugs off American streets, a suburban queen bee decided she could rob my family's legacy with fabricated fines and intimidation. Bethany Kensington Wright had just declared war on the wrong federal agent. She assumed she was up against a helpless military family. What she didn't know was that I specialize in dismantling criminal networks, and her petty HOA empire was about to be my next takedown. Bethany's counterattack came just 48 hours later, crafted like suburban warfare. A registered letter landed in Maya's mailbox demanding immediate vehicle removal within 24 hours, or else an emergency tow. Not 48 hours, not a grace period, 24. In other words, she was trying to steal federal property while I was serving overseas. The letter was carbon copied to Carl's city council office and the local police, filled with fabricated claims of health and safety violations and neighborhood degradation. All complete fiction, dressed up in official-looking letterhead with legal jargon designed to terrify. Maya called me from Grandma's kitchen, her voice tight with panic over the creak of those familiar floorboards. "Tank, there's a tow truck circling the block. The driver keeps staring at your Jeep like he's measuring it." Even Grandma's vanilla candles couldn't cover the fear in her voice. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. This was psychological warfare, suburban style. That's when I threw my first counterpunch. I reached out to JAG, the Judge Advocate General, military lawyers who treat constitutional violations like their morning coffee. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams skimmed my case file, and I watched her expression shift from calm professionalism to full-blown fury. "Rodriguez, this woman isn't just threatening you, she's trying to steal federal law enforcement property. That's not an HOA violation, that's a federal felony." Here's what most people don't realize. The Service Member Civil Relief Act doesn't just shield deployed troops from shady contracts. It specifically prohibits harassment of a service member's property while they're overseas. And in my case, the Jeep wasn't just a personal ride. It was federal law enforcement equipment, government-owned, mission-critical, and untouchable without authorization. Williams wasted no time. She filed a formal complaint with Base Command, setting off a chain reaction I'll never forget, a federal military liaison review. Just like that, Bethany's suburban power trip was glowing red on the radar of people with real authority. But then came the twist that made this personal. While I was working the legal angle, Maya dug deeper into Grandma's old HOA files. Buried in the meeting minutes from 2019, she uncovered the smoking gun, a letter written by Bethany herself. The letter was a bombshell. In it, Bethany urged the City Planning Commission to reject military housing assistance in Willowbrook, claiming transient military populations don't invest in long-term community stability. Translation? She'd been working to keep military families out for years. I imagine the texture of that brittle paper crumbling between Maya's fingers as she snapped photos for evidence. I can still hear the sharp breath she took when she realized the truth. Tank, she's been systematically targeting every military family here. And she was right. The Hendersons were written up because their son left his bike outside. The Washingtons were fined for excessive noise when their newborn cried at night. This wasn't random HOA nitpicking, it was organized discrimination with political cover. Carl, of course, had a luxury condo project in the works, a deal that needed HOA approval for zoning variances. Military families with their work vehicles, unpredictable deployments, and modest lifestyles didn't fit the glossy marketing pitch. Maya's teacher instincts went into overdrive. She began contacting other targeted families, carefully building a record. Every bogus violation, every threatening letter, every intimidation tactic. Without even realizing it, she was constructing a federal discrimination case. But Bethany wasn't done. She escalated, and this time she crossed a line she could never walk back. Maya called me, her phone picking up the click of designer heels on concrete as Bethany strutted up to Grandma's property, conducting her own inspection. She photographed my Jeep from every angle, took measurements with a tape measure, and sneered at Maya. "Your brother's service doesn't excuse non-compliance," she said, dripping condescension. "Perhaps your family should consider whether this neighborhood is appropriate for your lifestyle." Code words with an ugly meaning. We don't want your kind here. Your kind here. That was the last straw.
My counterpunch was swift, precise, and devastating. Using remote access, I activated the GPS tracking and security suite built into my Jeep, standard task force gear. The data lit up like Christmas morning. 17 times in just 3 days, Bethany trespassed on my property, photographing classified federal law enforcement equipment without clearance. That wasn't simple harassment anymore. That bordered on espionage. When my task force supervisor, Captain Sarah Chin, reviewed the data, her reaction was sharp and unfiltered. "Rodriguez, how fast do you want me to make this woman's life complicated?" For the first time, Bethany Kensington Wright was about to meet consequences she couldn't manipulate or intimidate her way out of. But her next move reeked of desperation, cloaked in suburban authority, and it nearly tore my family apart. 3 days after my JAG complaint, she hired executive safe security to patrol for community standards compliance. 2 guards in a white SUV, security plastered on the sides, circling like sharks and photographing my Jeep every hour as if it were a bomb threat. But the surveillance wasn't the real danger. It was the poison they spread among the neighbors. Maya called me in tears, her voice trembling over a satellite line from some godforsaken desert outpost. "Tank, they're telling people you're dangerous, that military vehicles in neighborhoods attract threats. Mrs. Patterson won't even look me in the eye anymore." Hearing Maya sob while desert winds howled through my headset turned my blood to ice. They weren't just targeting me, they were dismantling my family's reputation while I was powerless to defend them. My next counterstrike had to be surgical. But I was 8,000 miles away with limited comms. On my next authorized call, I explained to Captain Chen how private contractors were actively surveilling federal task force assets. Her answer wasn't what I expected. "Rodriguez, this is tricky. If we come in too hard, we prove their claims that your vehicle is a danger. We need them to hang themselves." That's when the twist appeared, hidden in plain sight. I remotely accessed my Jeep's security system. Federal task force vehicles carry more surveillance tech than most precincts: motion sensors, infrared cameras, GPS tracking, and automatic image capture of anyone within 15 feet. The footage chilled my blood. Bethany wasn't just documenting violations. At 1:43 a.m., she crept up with a flashlight, peering into my Jeep's interior, snapping photos, snapping the dashboard, even tugging on the doors. She was actively trying to access classified surveillance gear. But the part that truly scared me? She wasn't alone. The video showed her pointing out specific features to the private security guards, who carefully photographed encrypted radios and federal comm systems like they were cataloging evidence. And while Bethany played spy, the fallout hit Maya hardest. Parents at her school began whispering that a military family with security issues shouldn't be teaching their kids. Her principal even pulled her in for a conversation about community concerns.
When Maya called me, I could hear the smell of chalk dust clinging to her words, her voice thick with fear. "Tank, they're destroying my career." Bethany told the PTA military families bring instability and risk into neighborhoods. She's turning my job against me. That's when it sank in. This wasn't about a Jeep anymore. This was systematic character assassination, and I was powerless to stop it. From 8,000 miles away, the taste of helplessness is grit and rage. Sitting in a desert comms bunker surrounded by the machinery of war overseas, I listened helplessly as a suburban tyrant dismantled my sister's life back home. Bethany's hired guards escalated, targeting Maya directly. The lead one, a washed-up cop with a power trip, cornered her in a grocery store parking lot. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your brother's military activities," he said, blocking her path to the car. "That vehicle contains equipment that could pose risks to community safety. We need to know what kind of operations he's running from that house." Maya, ever the teacher with nerves of steel, hit record on her phone. "Are you implying my brother, who's overseas protecting this country, is some kind of threat to American families?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor I could hear later. The guard leaned closer, invading her space. "Military personnel sometimes bring problems home. PTSD, weapons, surveillance tech. We're just keeping the community safe." In reality, they were painting me as a ticking time bomb, a stereotype of the unstable veteran. But Maya's recording captured gold, the guard admitting they were investigating classified surveillance equipment in my Jeep. That one line flipped the script. It became evidence in a federal espionage case. My counterstrike came through channels Bethany couldn't touch. Captain Chen reported exec security to the Federal Licensing Bureau for unauthorized surveillance of government property. Within 24 hours, the guards vanished. Their company now faced a federal investigation. Bethany's reaction was pure panic. She spammed emergency complaints to anyone with a badge: police, fire, code enforcement, even animal control. But instead of burying me, she built a paper trail of her obsession with federal assets. The war had escalated. My family was still bleeding, and I was half a world away. What Bethany didn't realize was that she had just triggered protocols that would bring the full weight of federal law enforcement crashing down on her suburban kingdom. Her desperation hit critical mass at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Maya's security camera caught it all. Maya's security system caught every federal crime in high definition, but the sound is what's burned into my memory. Clang, clang, clang. Bolt cutters crunching through my security chain, each metallic snap ripping apart the quiet of a suburban morning like gunfire. Maya's frantic call jolted me awake in a dusty deployment tent, 8,000 miles away. "Tank, she's cutting your locks. She's got a tow truck. She's stealing your Jeep right now." Through her phone camera, I watched Bethany Kensington Wright commit multiple federal felonies in real time. Hair wild, still in a bathrobe, directing chaos in my driveway. She had hired Discount Dave's Towing under the table, cash only, no paperwork. But the driver froze when he saw the task force decals. He stepped back like the Jeep was radioactive. "Lady, this is government property. I'm not touching it for any amount of money." Bethany snapped, hysteria dripping from her voice, spit flying as she screamed, "It's abandoned property. I'm HOA president. I have legal authority to remove community violations." Those words, captured from 3 separate security cameras, instantly transformed into Exhibit A in a federal theft case. My counterstrike was immediate and brutal. My counterstrike was devastating. I reached Captain Chen through emergency channels, triggering federal theft protocols. Within minutes, U.S. Marshals were racing toward my grandmother's house, lights flashing, sirens tearing through the morning calm. And here's the twist. My Jeep's hidden systems had been documenting everything from the moment Bethany touched it. Federal task force vehicles aren't just cars, they're mobile surveillance hubs. Kill switches, GPS beacons, auto-activated cameras, all programmed to wake up the second unauthorized access occurs. When Bethany cut my luck, she didn't just commit theft, she triggered a Homeland Security alert that rippled across 3 states. Meanwhile, Maya kept recording as Bethany made her fatal mistake. After the tow truck driver fled, tires screeching across asphalt, Bethany doubled down. She changed the locks on the community gate, trapping my federal vehicle inside and blocking law enforcement access. If he wants his precious military truck back, he can follow proper HOA procedures, she shrieked, waving new keys like a suburban warlord drunk on power. Military service doesn't put him above community standards. Rage surged through me, helpless and raw, as I watched her steal government property while my sister filmed every second of her meltdown. Even through the phone, I swore I could smell diesel exhaust and the sharp sweat of fear. Knowledge bomb. Federal task force vehicles are wired with automatic alerts. Any tampering, cut locks, forced entry, unauthorized movement, pings Homeland Security, logs GPS, and deploys federal response teams. Bethany had just walked straight into that trap. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was theft of classified federal equipment with terrorism enhancement potential. Takeaway: stealing a federal task force vehicle doesn't just trigger theft charges. It unleashes national security protocols, automatic alerts, and full-scale federal response. And Bethany had just lit that fuse. The community shift began with Mrs. Patterson, who watched Bethany's meltdown from her front window. A widow who'd survived the Great Depression and buried 2 military sons, she wasn't about to watch an HOA tyrant destroy a deployed soldier's family. She picked up the phone, rallying every neighbor, every veteran, every decent person who'd quietly endured Bethany's reign of terror. By 10 a.m., my grandmother's house wasn't isolated anymore. It was ringed with neighbors, forming a human shield around federal property. "This ends here, today," declared Tom Henderson, a 72-year-old Vietnam vet whose son had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. "You want that boy's vehicle? You go through 30 American veterans first." When Maya called me again, her voice carried strength instead of fear. "Tank, you won't believe this. The whole neighborhood is out here. Mr. Henderson brought his flag. Mrs. Chen is serving coffee. Nobody's leaving." My chest tightened with gratitude.
Even across an ocean. But Bethany's response to solidarity was nothing short of suburban fascism. She dialed every government office she could find, filing emergency complaints. Police were told veterans were forming an armed militia. The fire department was warned of explosive hazards from military equipment. Code enforcement was fed lies about unauthorized assemblies. Even animal control was dragged into the circus. Bethany even stooped to filing claims that veterans' emotional support dogs were attack animals. Every bogus report was another federal crime. False statements against military personnel and theft of government property carry heavy penalties under multiple statutes. The breaking point came when federal marshals rolled into Willowbrook Estates and discovered the community gate had been rekeyed, blocking them from retrieving federal assets. That wasn't just arrogance, that was obstruction of federal justice. Marshal Jennifer Torres, a no-nonsense agent with a resume of arresting cartel bosses and domestic terrorists, took one look at the gate and her eyes hardened. "Ma'am, you've obstructed federal agents investigating theft of government property. Open this gate immediately or face additional federal charges." Bethany's answer sealed her fate forever. "I don't recognize federal authority over private HOA property. You people have no jurisdiction here." She had just declared war on the United States government in her bathrobe. Game over. 72 hours later, I landed stateside, still tasting desert sand and adrenaline. Maya was waiting in Grandma's kitchen, surrounded by a mountain of evidence thick enough to topple a small government. But what hit me first wasn't the sight, it was the smell. Not vanilla candles, not tortillas. Desperation, fear. It had soaked into the walls while I was gone. "Tank, you need to see this before the feds do," Maya whispered, her hands trembling as she spread documents across the dining table.
Inside the manila folders were 5 years of HOA records, records that changed everything. Financial records, meeting notes, and correspondence, all collected by Maya through what she modestly called her teacher network, were spread across the table. But one document froze the blood in my veins: a contract between Kensington Urban Holdings and Eastbrook Development Corporation, dated just 6 months before I inherited Grandma's house. The subject line read, "Willowbrook Estates Acquisition Strategy, Phase 2 Implementation." Maya's voice dropped, equal parts fury and revelation. Tank, this wasn't random harassment of military families. They were systematically clearing properties for a multi-million-dollar development deal. The aged paper crumbled in my hands as I read the details. Carl's company had already pre-sold 47 properties in Willowbrook to a national developer for luxury condos they didn't even own yet. Included in that list was Grandma's house. "Look at this appendix," Maya said, her finger trembling as she pointed to the names. Every vulnerable family, military households, the elderly, anyone too powerless to fight back, was marked for acquisition facilitation. The Hendersons, the Martinez family, Grandma Rosa, all of them targeted in a coordinated campaign to force sales at below-market prices. But then came the revelation that detonated everything we thought we knew. Bethany had been forging HOA rules. Maya slid out the original 1987 Willowbrook HOA bylaws. Not only did they permit military vehicles, they were explicitly protected under federal compliance statutes. Tank, she created fake rules and counted on fear and ignorance to keep people from checking, Maya said, her voice hardening with each word. And then she dropped the final hammer. The HOA's financial ledgers revealed systematic embezzlement, over $184,000 siphoned off in 3 years into accounts tied to Kensington Urban Holdings. Carl's development company funneled money through fake consulting contracts and so-called community projects that never happened. Key insight: when HOA boards misappropriate community funds for personal businesses without residents' approval, it amounts to federal mail fraud once any communication crosses state lines. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act applies when such crimes create a repeated pattern of enterprise that touches interstate commerce. Bottom line, HOA financial fraud spread across multiple properties with deliberate targeting can trigger federal RICO charges. That's organized crime territory with 20-year prison terms. In the kitchen, the mix of Maya's fear and determination filled the air as she laid out the final evidence. "Tank, I think they killed her." She handed me violation letters sent to Grandma during her last weeks in hospice, citations for supposed property care failures, and legal threats against a bedridden woman. Each bogus notice sent her blood pressure soaring. The hospice nurse confided that Grandma kept asking, "If we'd lose the house." Her voice echoed in my memory, "Mijo, don't let them take our home." I had thought the medication made her ramble. She was warning me. Maya was no longer the timid teacher bullied by neighborhood tyrants. She had become a fighter, armed with proof and righteous anger. "Tank, this isn't about your Jeep anymore. This is organized crime hiding under the mask of community governance." They weren't just enforcing rules, they were destroying families for profit. The balance of power hadn't shifted, it had detonated. Federal prosecutors were on the verge of receiving a RICO case tied to fraud, conspiracy, civil rights abuses, and elder exploitation. But the deeper realization hit me. I wasn't just fighting over property. I was fighting for my grandmother's memory and for every family they had ruined. The battle had turned personal in ways Bethany never imagined. Within 2 days, a war room rose inside Grandma's living room, and the irony struck me hard. Plotting the downfall of suburban tyranny in the very room where Grandma once shouted at telenovela villains, Maya had become something unrecognizable. The timid teacher was gone, replaced by a strategist orchestrating federal agents, veteran allies, and a battalion of furious neighbors. The cozy scent of vanilla candles had been permanently swapped out for the harsh mix of burnt coffee, legal files, and the tension of government business. Captain Chen arrived flanked by 2 federal prosecutors, carrying enough legal weight to topple an entire regime. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez spread Maya's documents across every table, shaking her head in disbelief. Rodriguez, I've seen cartel money laundering cases with less evidence than this. That was when she explained something that made my task force training snap into focus. Back in my federal crimes course, RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, was framed as a tool for mob bosses and cartels. But now I realized suburban tyrants who orchestrate systematic fraud and discrimination across state lines fall under the same law. Maya's files revealed a coordinated criminal enterprise, embezzlement, fraud, civil rights abuses, all tied between Carl's city council seat and Bethany's HOA authority. Because Carl's development projects touched interstate commerce, federal jurisdiction applied. The allies gathering in Grandma's living room resembled a resistance cell. Tom Henderson arrived with his Vietnam vet network, 12 men who had already survived real wars and They weren't intimidated by suburban corruption. Mrs. Patterson supplied surveillance photos, clear shots of Bethany and Carl holding secret midnight meetings in the community center. From Maya's teacher union came an unexpected asset: media expertise. Teachers excel at breaking down complicated issues for working families, and they'd been eager for a chance to stand with military households against discrimination. The sound of Maya's increasingly steady voice giving orders now filled the same rooms where Grandma once hummed Mexican lullabies. Seeing my little sister direct federal agents and neighborhood volunteers eased something heavy in my chest. For Maya, this financial battle was deeply personal. She spent sleepless nights digging through HOA ledgers, her teacher's eye spotting patterns the same way she once caught students plagiarizing. The embezzlement wasn't just theft, it was a betrayal that insulted her instincts as an educator. "Tank, remember how Mom used to balance the family budget on this table?" Maya asked, pointing at spreadsheets from a forensic accountant that traced $184,000 siphoned out of HOA accounts. She taught us stealing from families is the worst kind of crime. Forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh then explained Carl's scheme, selling properties early to out-of-state developers while coercing current owners into forced sales. It echoed the advanced fee frauds I'd studied in financial crimes training: promise property, take money up front, manipulate circumstances until delivery is impossible. Maya had even uncovered emails between Carl and Eastbrook Development outlining timelines to displace residents from homes they didn't yet own. The violation cut deep. They had targeted Grandma's house before she even passed. Our DIY surveillance network fused my military skills with community resolve: hidden cameras, scheduled patrols, encrypted communication lines. Mrs. Patterson's bay window became the watchtower, Tom Henderson's garage transformed into equipment storage, and Maya's home evolved into the comms hub. The recall election plan was drawn straight from Maya's civics lessons. She'd always taught her students that democracy survives only when people show up. Now she was proving it. Few realize that HOA boards can be overthrown with petitions from just 25 to 33% of homeowners.
To trigger a special election, Maya began the door-to-door. Maya's campaign exposed the full reach of Bethany's tyranny. The Washingtons produced evidence of racial harassment. The Johnsons brought forward records showing veteran discrimination. The elderly Kowalskis had been penalized for the noise of their oxygen concentrator. Within 72 hours, Maya had gathered signatures from 67% of Willowbrook homeowners demanding the board's immediate removal. The scent of victory mingled with the desert dust still clinging to my fatigues. Our media strategy leaned on Maya's teacher union connections. Stories of military families being harassed went viral in veteran networks, sparking congressional interest.
Within days, 3 representatives requested federal briefings on systemic HOA discrimination. The discovery of insurance fraud was pure investigative instinct. Maya uncovered false claims Bethany filed, blaming property damage on my Jeep that never happened. From my task force training, I knew prosecutors loved insurance fraud charges, easy to prove, carrying heavy penalties. Civil rights attorneys joined us after reviewing the discrimination records. The systematic targeting of military families violated federal fair housing laws, while grandma's mistreatment qualified as elder abuse under federal protections, damages worth millions. Maya was elected interim HOA president by acclamation during an emergency meeting of residents. Her first act, freezing every HOA account pending federal investigation. Watching her raise the gavel in the same community center where Bethany once terrorized families was justice delivered ice cold. By then, this had grown far beyond personal revenge. The case was shaping up as a national blueprint for dismantling HOA corruption, safeguarding military families, and proving that organized communities could defeat organized crime. But Bethany and Carl had no idea how fast the trap was tightening. At 3:17 a.m., Bethany's desperation crossed into crime. Mia's infrared cameras caught Bethany in our backyard, desperately burning HOA financial records behind Grandma's old tool shed. The sharp stench of scorched paper and lighter fluid drifted into Maya's bedroom, mixing with the anxious sweat scent that seemed to cling to Bethany everywhere she went. She hunched over a metal trash can like a suburban witch, feeding documents to the flames with trembling hands. "Tank, she's destroying evidence in our yard," Maya whispered over the phone, watching through her window as Bethany struck match after match. She was openly burning financial files while under federal investigation. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Federal surveillance teams were already tracking every reckless move, every crime born of her panic. Watching that entitled suburban tyrant erase proof of her corruption was twisted poetry. But Bethany's sabotage didn't stop there. It escalated into personal warfare that triggered my task force instincts. The next morning, Maya's car was wrecked, all 4 tires slashed, and military scum sprayed in dripping red across the windshield. The crunch of shattered glass beneath Mia's shoes as she examined the damage sent a cold, calculating calm through me. The taste of helpless rage was one I knew from deployment, watching enemies target those you couldn't shield. Only now, the battlefield was our neighborhood, and the enemy was attacking my family. My counterstrike was straightforward and satisfying. I called Captain Chen, and with one phone call he secured a federal protective detail for Maya and the other witnesses. Not obvious guards, but agents skilled at blending in with morning joggers and coffee shop crowds. Bethany's spying was now being tracked by professionals with clearances and arrest authority. The community answered too. Tom Henderson mobilized veteran patrols, shutting down Bethany's midnight prowls completely. The echo of combat boots on neighborhood pavement became our new soundtrack of resistance. By 2 a.m., the sound of boots on pavement had become the neighborhood's new rhythm. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen turned into command central, where protection shifts were mapped out over trays of cookies and waves of righteous anger. But Carl's growing desperation exposed a deeper level of corruption than any of us had anticipated. Mia uncovered city council recordings where Carl pressured the police chief to dismiss complaints from military families. Hearing his smug voice through her laptop brought my academy training roaring back. At the academy, we learned that when public officials use their authority to systematically deny citizens' rights, it rises to a federal civil rights conspiracy. Carl wasn't just covering for Bethany, he was weaponizing government power to enforce discrimination. "These military people create instability," Carl sneered on the recording, his tone dripping arrogance. "Their cars, their routines, their problems lower property values and ruin community character." That single recording became Exhibit A in a federal conspiracy case. Bethany, meanwhile, was caught red-handed on a federal wire. She confronted Maya outside the grocery store, clutching an envelope swollen with cash, her designer perfume failing to hide her desperation. $50,000 for your family, she muttered, her hands shaking as she pushed it forward. Military families deserve better neighborhoods. Take the money. Find someplace more appropriate. Maya, guided by her teacher's instincts, kept her phone recording the entire encounter while federal agents observed from unmarked vehicles. From my training, I knew that attempted witness bribery came with a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. But Bethany wasn't finished racking up felonies. She actually tried bribing federal agents themselves. Using a private investigator she paid with stolen HOA funds, Bethany attempted to slip money to federal operatives to make the military problem go away. The sheer stupidity of her actions almost felt refreshing. Bethany actually believed federal agents could be bribed as easily as her HOA board. But agents don't just turn down bribes, they log them, record them, and attach them to airtight case files that guarantee decades behind bars. Meanwhile, Carl's political allies began scattering like rats from a sinking ship. The mayor quickly distanced himself. City council members demanded Carl step down. His development company's stock tanked as state media blasted corruption allegations across headlines. The polished scent of his cologne couldn't cover the panic seeping from him during emergency council meetings. He even tried to weaponize city resources, spinning claims that outside military agitators were undermining prosperous local businesses. Every abuse of authority was meticulously cataloged by federal investigators trained to dismantle political corruption. Then the threats started. Maya found anonymous notes tucked under her windshield, listened to distorted voicemails warning that accidents happen to teachers who don't stay quiet. The tremor in her voice when she played them for me ignited something primal and protective deep in my chest. But my counter-response wasn't reckless, it was exact federal precision. Threats against witnesses in federal cases automatically activate FBI terrorism task forces. Each message was traced with forensic tools, phone records, handwriting analysis, digital tracking that would put TV crime labs to shame. Bethany's last-ditch gambit was filing false police reports, accusing Maya of being unstable and plotting violence against community leaders. She went so far as to claim military families were forming armed militias in Willowbrook. Filing false reports against federal witnesses in the middle of an active investigation isn't some petty local offense, it's federal obstruction of justice with terrorism enhancements attached. The brilliance of it was, federal patience meant letting Bethany dismantle herself, one reckless crime at a time, while agents methodically built airtight cases to guarantee she'd never victimize another family. Her last desperate move was a media smear campaign that exposed the true reach of her suburban criminal network. The first strike landed at Maya's school. The district office was flooded with anonymous complaints accusing her of indoctrinating kids with anti-government military propaganda and creating unsafe environments for civilian families. Hearing Maya's shaky voice during her panicked call made my fists clench tight. "Tank, they're trying to end my career," she whispered from her deserted classroom. The usual scent of chalk dust and childhood innocence was now poisoned with fear. "Parents are demanding I be fired. The principal pulled me in for emergency talks about my supposed ties to unstable military elements." That's when I discovered Bethany had retained Morrison & Associates, the PR firm famous for cleaning up disgraced politicians. They were spinning Maya into a dangerous veteran with PTSD, claiming she was bringing military-grade threats into peaceful neighborhoods. The texture of those fabrications felt different from the propaganda I'd encountered overseas. This wasn't about destabilizing missions, this was personal warfare aimed at dismantling families. My groundwork had been laid for months, and Maya's record-keeping had sharpened into something even my federal training hadn't prepared me for. She documented every threat, every smear, every orchestrated strike against our reputation. But the campaign revealed a darker truth. Bethany wasn't acting alone. She'd been coordinating with HOA boards in 3 different states to create model policies for displacing military families. This wasn't isolated harassment, it was a systemic program being exported nationwide. From my civil rights training, I knew that conspiracies that cross state lines open the door to RICO prosecutions.
When organizations align to trample citizens' rights across jurisdictions, federal racketeering law takes center stage. When discrimination rises to the level of constitutional rights violations, it stops being petty harassment and becomes organized crime. Maya's counterstrike was nothing short of devastating. Her students and their parents organized a rally that flooded the school parking lot with American flags and hand-painted signs declaring, "We support Teacher Maya," and "Military families protect our freedom." The voices of third graders chanting, "Thank you, Mr. Tank's sister," carried across the same playground where Maya had spent years shaping young minds. Those children understood justice more clearly than half the adults in Willowbrook. But Bethany's panic crossed into full-blown criminal insanity when she hired private investigators to shadow Maya's every move. They followed her to school, snapped photos of her with her students, recorded her grocery trips, even tracked her morning jogs. The sharp click-click of telephoto lenses outside classroom windows ignited something primal and protective deep inside me. During a routine safety check, Maya found not 1, but 3 surveillance devices planted in her car, all traced back to Morrison & Associates through federal procurement records. The beauty of federal law is its precision. In task force training, they drilled it into us. Unauthorized surveillance devices invoke the Wiretap Act, 20-year federal sentences when linked to witness intimidation. But when those bugs are planted in a vehicle, it escalates into Homeland Security jurisdiction with terrorism enhancements. Captain Chen's response was immediate and crushing. The FBI's Counterintelligence Division took control, classifying Maya's surveillance as potential domestic terrorism. Overnight, Bethany's suburban vendetta was being handled by people who normally chase international operatives. The story exploded nationally when military advocacy groups picked it up. Congressmen demanded hearings into systematic HOA discrimination against military families. The spotlight burned hotter than Bethany could withstand. Fox News dialed Maya's number. CNN requested sit-down interviews. Military Times splashed her case across its front page, calling it suburban warfare against service families. Carl's political career didn't just stumble, it disintegrated in real time. During a live broadcast city council meeting, federal agents served warrants and carted out box after box of evidence while cameras rolled. Carl sat frozen in his chair, the texture of absolute humiliation carved into his face. His expression was the portrait of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. But it wasn't Carl who lit the biggest federal firestorm, it was Morrison & Associates. Their fatal mistake came in the form of a polished community safety report that claimed military families brought elevated crime, domestic violence, and substance abuse into suburban neighborhoods. Fake statistics, manipulated veteran crime data, a manufactured narrative designed to turn neighbors against those who served. I'll never forget the way Maya's teacher instincts hardened into righteous fury as she read the report. "Tank, they just attacked every military family in America with lies designed to make communities reject veterans," she whispered, the words trembling with rage. She wasn't wrong. Publishing false data to incite discrimination against military families isn't just slander, it's a federal hate crime. And when that slander is systematically coordinated across state lines for profit, it escalates into racketeering with civil rights conspiracy enhancements. The domino effect was immediate. The federal probe exploded into 17 states as military families came forward with eerily similar stories, fabricated violations, coordinated harassment, entire neighborhoods mobilized to drive them out. Maya's meticulous documentation became the gold standard for prosecutors building RICO indictments against corrupt HOA networks. Emails began flooding her inbox, military spouses sharing their own battles against harassment and discrimination. The sound of Maya's voice, now steady and authoritative, echoed through the same rooms where Grandma once told us bedtime stories about standing up to bullies.
My little sister had transformed, no longer a victim, but a national advocate for military families. They thought they were fighting one teacher and one soldier, Maya said one evening, surrounded by stacks of federal case files. What they didn't realize was that they declared war on every American family that serves this country. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be federally spectacular. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like what was about to unfold. Packed beyond fire code limits, walls lined with federal agents, 6 news crews jockeying for position, and rows of
military families standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to watch justice crash down. Families from 3 states had driven hours to witness what justice looked like in suburbia. The air was thick with stale coffee, righteous fury, and the electric tension of federal agents preparing to show why you never steal from the government. Congressional representatives filled the front row, pens scratching furiously as they prepared for upcoming hearings on military family discrimination. Bethany made her entrance like she was still queen of a crumbling empire, fashionably late in a white Lexus, greeted not by deference but by a gauntlet of protesters. Signs rose above the crowd. Military families matter and prosecute HOA terrorists. The chant of veterans, "Thank you for your service," rose up, aimed not at her but at Maya. The sharp click of Bethany's designer heels on the asphalt was swallowed by the roar of voices. Behind her, Carl shuffled like a broken man already half inside a prison cell. Panic clung to both of them like cheap cologne. Maya stepped to the podium first. The timid teacher was gone. In her place stood a national advocate with federal backing and congressional attention behind every word. For 5 years, these people used their positions to wage war against military families, she declared, her voice amplified across live streams reaching thousands. They fabricated rules, embezzled funds, and coordinated discrimination campaigns that violated everything this country stands for. The response shook the community center to its foundations. Applause thundered like a storm, rattling the windows. Then federal prosecutor Rebecca Martinez advanced, flanked by evidence boxes stacked high like monuments to months of investigation. Her voice was cold, sharp, and final. The United States government has compiled overwhelming evidence of organized suburban crime. Charges include federal property theft, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Each word landed like a hammer blow, the kind criminals know signals the endgame. Then came Tom Henderson, speaking not just for veterans, but for every family betrayed. His voice cracked with raw emotion. "My son served 3 tours protecting this country's freedom, and these people thought they could spit on that sacrifice for their personal profit. Today, they learned they were wrong." And then came the mic drop moment. I stepped to the podium, feeling Grandma's presence as if she were beside me, her words echoing in my mind. "Stand up to bullies, mijo, but do it the right way." This was the right way. Bethany Kensington Wright thought she was cutting into a soldier's personal jeep, I began, my voice slicing through the silence. What she actually did was interfere with an active federal drug operation, compromise classified surveillance equipment, and steal property belonging to the United States government. The collective gasp that followed was like the air being vacuumed from the room. That Jeep wasn't just mine. It carried surveillance gear valued at $347,000, along with evidence tied to cartel investigations spanning 4 states. When she broke those locks at dawn, she didn't just commit theft, I continued. She compromised national security operations designed to keep drugs off our streets and protect American families. Bethany's complexion turned the color of old concrete as the true weight of her federal recklessness hit her. She wasn't just a suburban tyrant anymore. She had crossed into national security crimes.
But her worst crime, I said, my anger sharpening into something cool and judicial, was waging systematic war against military families. She exploited government positions to steal from the very community that trusted her, all while believing her suburban entitlement outweighed federal law. The crowd erupted in a thunderous ovation. Chants of "Lock her up" and "Justice for our heroes" rattled the walls as federal agents closed in on their targets. Then Federal Marshal Jennifer Torres advanced, calm and precise, moving with the confidence of someone who had cuffed countless people who thought themselves untouchable. She stopped at Bethany's chair, badge gleaming under the lights. Enforcement property, conspiracy to violate civil rights, embezzlement of community funds, witness intimidation, and obstruction of federal justice. The metallic snap of handcuffs reverberated through the sound system as cameras zoomed in, immortalizing the moment suburban tyranny collided with federal justice. Bethany's smug defiance cracked, her face draining to ash as the reality hit. Her manicured kingdom offered no shield from federal prison. Carl tried to slip out a side door, the coward's escape, only to be intercepted by agents who had mapped his every move before he made it. His arrest lacked drama, but the sight of corruption finally colliding with accountability was its own satisfaction.
The lesson was brutal but clear. These weren't just vehicles, they were classified federal assets, protected by laws with mandatory minimums. And when suburban warlords tamper with federal operations, they learn that local corruption shatters against national law with surgical precision. Maya spoke next, her live interview carried across the nation. The timid teacher was gone, replaced by an advocate who had forced Congress to act. This proves organized harassment of military families is a federal crime, she told millions. No HOA board, no matter how corrupt, is above the United States Constitution. The victory was sweeter than every memory of Grandma's kitchen, spiced with the satisfaction of seeing bullies discover that federal law does not bargain. 18 months later, I stood again in that kitchen, sentencing report in hand. I could almost hear Grandma's voice whisper, "Justice served the right way, mijo." Bethany received 8 years in federal prison with no parole, plus $647,000 in restitution to the families she'd harmed. The federal judge's words entered legal history. Your systematic harassment of military families represents domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. Carl got 6 years, along with a lifetime ban from public office. His development empire crumbled into dust, $3.2 million in fines hammering the last nails into his legacy. Carl's empire ended with $3.2 million in community settlements, ensuring every family they had tormented received compensation for years of suffering. But the true victory wasn't measured in money. It was in watching our neighborhood transform from a place of fear into a community that protected its own. Maya, now the democratically elected HOA president, revolutionized local governance. She introduced bylaws that became the national standard for protecting military families. The air that once reeked of corruption was replaced by the fresh smell of hope when she unveiled the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, federal protections written directly into community law. Bethany's former house, seized through federal asset forfeiture, was reborn as Veteran Memorial Park. Children laugh on swings where tyranny once ruled, their joy echoing across grass that now grows wild and free, untouched by measuring sticks. Maya's mission expanded beyond Willowbrook. She left teaching to found the Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights, helping families nationwide battle HOA discrimination. Her meticulous documentation methods are now part of FBI training curricula, shaping the next generation of investigators. Grandma's kitchen, once filled with the smell of tortillas and lessons about standing up to bullies, became command central for military family advocacy. Strategy sessions with congressional staffers, constitutional lawyers, and struggling families unfolded at the same table where she balanced our family's budget.
The practical impact went far beyond our street. Congress passed legislation requiring HOA financial transparency and safeguarding service members from systematic harassment. The Tank Rodriguez Act established federal oversight of community governance, with criminal penalties for discrimination against military families. Knowledge once buried became our gift to American households. Military personnel now understand that constitutional rights outweigh local ordinances. HOA boards can be recalled with just 25% of homeowner petitions. And systematic discrimination? Federal law treats it as organized crime, punishable by decades behind bars. The National HOA Corruption Database documented over 400 similar cases after our story went viral, sparking investigations that swept the nation. The reforms protected thousands of military families from suburban terrorism. Property values in Willowbrook rose by 31% after corruption was rooted out, proving that justice isn't just moral, it's profitable. Ethical governance attracts strong communities, and now military families seek out Willowbrook, knowing they'll be defended and celebrated. Maya's journey as a national advocate came with unexpected joy. She married David, Captain Sarah Chen's brother, and a Navy veteran who moved here because our story proved military families could triumph over corruption. Their wedding reception filled the same community center where federal justice had once thundered down. I found my own peace with Olena Martinez, the federal prosecutor who helped build our case. After transferring to local operations, she and I bought the house beside Grandma's. Every morning I wake in the neighborhood we fought for feels like victory lived daily. The Rodriguez Military Scholarship Fund, born from settlement money, has already sent 23 military children to college.